Imagine you're an 80-year-old heir to a multi-billion-dollar fashion empire, with no children to pass on your vast fortune. Now, who would you pick as the lucky recipient of your riches? Charity organizations, distant relatives, or maybe just your pet poodle? Well, Nicolas Puech, a descendant of the Hermès dynasty, chose the person who trimmed his hedges and watered his begonias, his 51-year-old gardener. Yes, you read that right. Half of Puech's $13.6 billion fortune was promised to a man more likely to have dirt under his fingernails than a Hermès tie around his neck. But hold on to your Hermès scarves, because this story is about to get even more bizarre. Not long after deciding to leave a massive chunk of his fortune to his green-thumbed friend, Puech made an astonishing claim. His entire $13 billion fortune had mysteriously vanished overnight. Just like that. You might be wondering why the heir to a luxury fashion house dynasty would even consider leaving his fortune to his gardener in the first place. And more importantly, how on earth does $13 billion just disappear into thin air? To get to the bottom of this puzzling tale, we need to rewind the clock, way back to the early 1800s. The story of Hermès begins with Thierry Hermès, born on January 10, 1801, in Krefeld near Dusseldorf. Thierry, the son of a German mother and a French immigrant father, had a rather rough start in life. His family, innkeepers by trade, was hit hard by the Napoleonic Wars, which claimed the lives of several family members. Those who survived were eventually taken out by disease, leaving the family in shambles. It was under these tragic circumstances that the Hermès family relocated to Paris in 1828, where a 27-year-old Thierry would first dip his toes into the world of leather making. Fast forward to 1837, and Thierry had set up his very first workshop at the ripe old age of 36. His goal? To create the best darn harnesses and bridles in all of France, catering to the noblemen and carriage businesses who could afford such luxuries. And boy, did he succeed. Thierry's harnesses were a hit, and business boomed. But alas, after a long and fruitful career, Thierry passed away in 1878 at the age of 77. Leaving his son, Charles-Émile, to take the reins. Pun absolutely intended. Charles-Émile wasn't about to let the family business trot along at a leisurely pace. He expanded Hermès' clientele to include the European elite, the Russian aristocracy, and the wealthy of North Africa, Asia, and the Americas. During his tenure, Charles-Émile designed the famous Haut à Courroie bag, a bag intended for carrying saddles. Yes, you read that correctly. A bag specifically for saddles. It was an instant success, and Hermès' reputation as a luxury brand continued to grow. After nearly 30 years, Charles-Émile decided it was time to pass the torch to his sons, Adolphe and Émile Maurice. The duo rebranded the company as Hermès Frères and took it to new heights. Émile Maurice even brought the zipper to France after discovering it in Canada, patenting the design and using it in Hermès products, thus making Hermès the first brand in France to incorporate this newfangled contraption. By 1914, Hermès was outfitting the Tsar of Russia with saddles, and the company's workshop employed up to 80 saddle craftsmen. Hermès continued to branch out, dabbling in men's ready-to-wear garments, jewelry, watches, sandals, and most famously, the silk scarf in the 1930s, which quickly became a hit with celebrities like Jacqueline Kennedy. The brand was on a roll, and there was no slowing down. In 1951, Émile Hermès handed the business over to his son-in-law, Robert Dumas, who introduced the iconic horse and carriage logo and the famous Kelly bag. The brand's popularity only continued to skyrocket under the leadership of Robert's son, Jean-Louis Dumas. Jean-Louis, always on the lookout for the next big thing, found inspiration in the most unlikely of places, on an Air France flight from Paris to London in 1984. English actress and singer Jane Birkin, known for her wicker basket bag, had an unfortunate incident where the basket's lid popped off in the overhead compartment, spilling her belongings everywhere. Seizing the opportunity, Jean-Louis introduced himself as the head of Hermès, and together they sketched the design for what would become the Birkin bag on a napkin. Although the Birkin bag didn't make waves initially, it eventually became the ultimate status symbol, with prices starting at $11,000 and climbing to over $1 million for the most exclusive versions. Today, Hermès is one of the most sought-after luxury brands in the world, steeped in history, tradition, and a story of innovation like no other. Fast forward to 2023, and we have Nicolas Puech, one of the great-grandchildren of Émile Maurice Hermès, whose net worth was once estimated at a jaw-dropping $13 billion. As an heir to the Hermès dynasty, Puech owned 5.7% of Hermès. But instead of leaving his fortune to charity, distant relatives, or even a fashionable poodle, he chose his gardener, a 51-year-old father of Moroccan descent. Described as an adopted son, this gardener must have done more than just tend to Puech's roses and trim his hedges. He must have earned Puech's trust in a way that no one else could. Puech's decision to bypass the usual suspects in favor of his gardener likely stemmed from years of feuding with his family over the future of Hermès. The early 2010s were a turbulent time for the company, with the luxury conglomerate Moet, Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, LVMH, attempting a hostile takeover. The Hermès family was divided, with some members wanting to resist LVMH's advances, while others were open to negotiations. Puech, ever the traditionalist, wanted to maintain Hermès's independence and was fiercely opposed to outside influence. In 2014, he left the company's supervisory board, distancing himself from the family's business dealings. With these conflicts in mind, it's not hard to see why Puech might have chosen a less conventional heir, someone he trusted completely, even if that someone was his gardener. But the story doesn't end there. Just when you thought things couldn't get any stranger, Puech dropped a bombshell. His $13 billion fortune had vanished without a trace. According to Puech, he had no idea where his assets had gone and pointed the finger at his former wealth manager, Eric Freiman. Puech claimed that Freiman had been managing his accounts and that he didn't realize he no longer owned the shares that made up the bulk of his wealth. But here's the kicker. A Geneva appeals court threw out Puech's claims, finding no evidence that Freiman had deceived his client over the 2 decades they worked together. The court pointed out that Puech had willingly signed over numerous blank documents to Freiman, giving him full control of the accounts. In other words, Puech's missing billions might be a result of his own lackadaisical approach to managing his wealth. As of July 12, 2023, the whereabouts of Puech's missing billions remain a mystery. Perhaps they're hidden away in some secret offshore account, or maybe they were invested in an ill-fated venture, or maybe, just maybe, Puech's gardener is sitting somewhere, pruning roses and waiting for those billions to turn up. Because let's face it, if you were promised half of a $13 billion fortune, you'd be keeping a close eye on the news too.